In the next 5 minutes, we're going to have a look at the timeline of a typical Agile software development project. Let's get started. So, what does a typical timeline for an Agile software development project look like? You start off by defining a product vision. You then proceed by creating a product backlog in a so-called refinement. Then, you need to properly set up your project and kick it off. Agile development and testing comprises building and testing your product step by step. Obviously, once you're confident enough that your product can be released to your stakeholders, you can start rolling it out. Once your product is out there, incremental development and testing should continue as part of Agile operations. Stakeholder feedback should also play a central role here. Okay, now let's get to the specifics of each project step. Start off with defining a vision for your product that defines, on a high level, which stakeholders will use it and how. This can be a short textual description, a simple drawing, an elaborate sketch, or even a poem. Be creative but concise. Make sure that everyone can easily understand your vision. I normally use at most 2 to 3 sentences to describe my product vision and an accompanying drawing. I place them in the product backlog for future reference. The next step is the product backlog refinement. Gather all of the relevant stakeholders and define the contents of your product backlog together with them. Keep in mind that this need not only be users, but can also be other stakeholders, like your help desk, for instance. Present to stakeholders the product vision, deduce the product backlog items, and then define the specifics of each item. Your product backlog items can, for instance, be so-called epics or user stories. Usually, I do this in several workshops, in which the stakeholders and I discuss use cases based on process drawings or application mockups. I can later on use all of them in the backlog. The project setup phase comprises the steps that are necessary for you to start a project based on your product backlog. Setting up a project correctly is paramount to its success. The usual initial steps that you need to take are securing a budget for the project, sketching a timeline, conducting a vendor evaluation, fixing and signing contracts. As it gets more concrete, you need to staff your project and, finally, kick it off, which means that you officially start. For the evaluation, I usually do a separate product backlog refinement with each vendor. Like this, I can already use the refined product backlog later on in the project. I normally set fixed rollout dates for my products, which is why I need to reduce the scope when I see that things get tight. This is the only real milestone that I define. This is the part where it really gets agile. Start by dividing development into iterations of equal length. You can change this later on. At the beginning of each iteration, lay out a plan for what your team will implement. In Scrum, this is called the sprint backlog. At the end of each iteration, you and your stakeholders should inspect the current state of the product and development process and adapt if necessary. I usually have many stakeholders involved in my projects to a varying degree. I do product reviews in a core team and let the wider range of stakeholders test during the iteration. Rolling out the product is never easy and mostly depends on which rollout approach you choose and whether your main stakeholders belong to your company or not. Do a phased rollout for certain stakeholder groups at a time or a big bang rollout for all stakeholder groups at once. Stakeholders outside of your company need more intense rollout communication aligned with your market. You have now created the first version of a product that needs to constantly evolve to meet the changing demands of your stakeholders. Don't forget that in the first step, an operations handover is needed. For truly agile operations, make sure that software deployments can be made frequently, for instance every 2 weeks, and that testing is as automated as possible. Timely collection of feedback about your stakeholder satisfaction and your operations enables you to swiftly adapt to changing demands. Set up tools for obtaining feedback and consider it in your product backlog. Now, that was probably a lot of information in just 5 minutes. What are the 3 key takeaway messages? Firstly, start your Agile software development project by building your product backlog. Then, develop and test your product in many iterations. Keep in mind that after the project is before the project. I hope you enjoyed this short introduction. Let me ask you one question. About which topic would you like to know more? Please let me know in the comments below. See ya!